This is your host, Brendan, and you're listening to the Ordinary to Ultra podcast. Each episode, I bring in an ultra runner and ask them about their journey to their first ultramarathon, or their first time running a new ultra distance. We'll dive into why they started running in the first place, why they decided to run an ultra, the obstacles they encountered, and what it took to get to the finish line and beyond.
Things were going really well. I remember being at like mile 30, and I was running eight-minute miles. And
Nice.
It's like, wow, this is great, feeling good. And remember asking at an aid station around mile 24, 26, what place am I in? And they're like, you're in sixth place. I'm like, all right, sweet, sixth place.
Whoa.
And so then, I continue hitting on the gas. I'm like, all right, this is great. I've got 20, 25 miles to go. And mile 35, I completely hit a wall. It was like I got hit in the face with a 2x4.
Hey everybody, Brendan here. You just got done listening to a snippet of the conversation I had with Jonathan Hayek today. Just a little bit of background on Jonathan. Jonathan's 38 years old. He lives in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. He was a special ed teacher, but he's actually a commercial real estate investor full-time today. And he has a wife and two little girls. And when he's not running, Jonathan likes to backcountry ski, play pickleball, and spend some time with his family. So today we're going to hear, obviously, a cool story about Jonathan's first ultra, the wall that he hit during this ultra, and what happened after this wall hit. So stay tuned to hear the full story. And without further ado, let's get into it. Hey, Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here today. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. Really looking forward to this conversation, Brendan.
Awesome. I'm curious, Jonathan, have you had any notable adventures or runs lately? We'd love to hear about it.
Oh gosh, I mean, I live in the mountains and it's winter running conditions right now. So we've gotten like 2 feet of snow in the last couple days. So in the winter, every run is an adventure. Winter months, you just kind of get in miles where you can. But I recently moved to Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And so I have just really been enjoying checking out the trails here and getting lost a little bit and finding new trails and just going on adventures where I may not know how long I'll be out or how far I'm going to run. So, yeah, all good things.
That is. So, when did you move to Steamboat?
Just this past summer, about 6 months ago. So I was formerly in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Okay. And we've been coming to Steamboat Springs for, vacation to the mountains for several years. And so we finally just decided to move here full time.
I love it. Lots of trail running opportunities, I imagine, in Steamboat. I haven't been personally, but that's really exciting.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. There's a great outdoor culture here. So we really love being here.
Okay. I'm curious where you were living before in Wyoming. What was running like out there?
I was in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and a lot of people think, Wyoming, it must be beautiful and mountainous, and Cheyenne is not. Cheyenne is in the southeast corner of the state. It's high plains. It's at about a 6,000 foot elevation, but there are no mountains there. And no trails really to speak of. When I was in Cheyenne, the closest trailhead was about an hour away. That's where I would have to go to get any trail running miles in. And I love being on trails and being outside. And we lived in Cheyenne for about 6.5 years, and it was time for us to move on. It was a great place to get us to where we are now, but it was time to move on. And so yeah, we're thrilled to be in Steamboat. Lots of running miles in Cheyenne. That's what I did mostly in Cheyenne was running on roads.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, I get that, especially during the winter, putting in lots of road miles, trying to get trail in when I can. Love it. Um, I want to step back and talk about when you first got into running. How long ago was that, and why did you get into running in the first place?
I really got interested in running in 2012. And, growing up, I was not a runner. I never ran cross country, never ran track, didn't play soccer. I played baseball. And, most people joke that baseball players don't really run. And
Yeah.
so I truly never thought of myself as a runner. But it was around this time period, 2012, where I was kind of in my young professional life and I was starting to think about personal challenges. And running was one of those things that I had in the back of my mind that I thought would always be kind of cool to be a runner. But, on the other hand, I thought, well, I'm not a runner. I don't know how to run. I'm not a good runner. And I can't do that. Then finally,
Mm.
2012 came. I was making some big life decisions and adjustments at that time, moved across the country from Illinois to Arizona and started training. I had a goal to train for my first marathon. And I thought, you know what, before my first marathon, I'm going to try a half marathon and see how that goes. And so
Uh-huh.
trained for my first half marathon. This is all on the roads. Trained for my
Mhm.
first half marathon. That went well. And so then morphed into training for my first marathon. So we're getting close to the 12-year mark of being an
Yeah.
active runner. So that's kind of my
Wow.
story of how I started running.
And would you say you've been pretty consistent throughout like that entire 12-year period?
Yes, fairly consistent. I started out, running that half marathon and marathon, and then I wanted to get into triathlon and Ironman.
Mm.
And so I continued to run, obviously, to train for triathlon. And so pursued
Mhm.
triathlon and Ironman for a few years. And, as I was training for that, running was maybe 3 or 4 days a week through that. And then
Mhm.
2016, 2017 came and I was kind of done with triathlon at that point. And so then switched to running full time. And
Mhm.
that's really when I transitioned to trail running. I've always done a mix of road running and trail running
Mhm.
for training miles. Races since then have largely been on trails. But a lot of my training miles, really since I started running, have been on the road.
Okay. And I just for a quick second want to dive into this triathlon phase you had. Did you, I mean, you must have enjoyed that for a little while, and then what inspired the shift away? I'm curious.
So triathlon was another one of those things that I had in the back of my mind that I thought, man, it'd be really cool to do triathlon and maybe
Yeah.
even do an Ironman one day. And
Yeah.
people in my life would just say, "Oh, Ironman, that's so bad for your body. It's not good to
It's
it's not good
crazy.
to run for that long or to exercise for that long."
Uh-huh.
And I was like, yeah, maybe, but still kind of kept it in the back of my mind. It'd be really cool to do an Ironman one day. And so it was just kind of one of those crazy personal challenges that I really wanted to pursue. And so I did for a few years. I did some all different distance races, from sprint tries to Olympic to half Ironman to full Ironman. And
Wow.
I really enjoyed triathlon. What I like about running and the transition to running was the simplicity of running.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Triathlon, uh, enthusiasts can, there's very much it's gear heavy, from the bikes and all the different shoes to the wetsuits and all this gear. And it's kind of cool to get into, but man, you can spend a lot of money on gear in triathlon. And it was also in 2016, 2017 that I moved to Cheyenne, Wyoming. And Cheyenne is not a good place to train for triathlon. It has brutal winds. So biking in Cheyenne is not pleasant. There are no open water swimming options in Cheyenne. And so it was really just kind of taking what the geography would give me. And so it was, more of a running terrain and geography. And I had mountains in Colorado that were not too far away. And so that's when I really decided to pursue trail running a little more.
Love it. Yeah. Running's got its own gear as well, but times that by 2 or 3. Yeah, you've got lots of gear, lots of money to spend. That makes sense.
Absolutely. And you can really go all out on running gear for sure, but there is still a simplicity to it, and you don't have to go all out on the gear. So I mean, we can get into gear if you want, but there are some people that take gear really, really seriously, and then other sort of a little more minimalist runners, people that are drinking from streams and just running with no shirt and a pair of shorts, and so there's definitely that part of the culture and trail running as well.
Yeah. Okay, you'll have to tell me about it. Before we get to gear, I'd love to hear about when you first heard about ultra running. And maybe that time is different than when you decided you wanted to run an ultra marathon.
Yeah. So, gosh, ultra running it always seemed like this insurmountable thing, like ultra marathon, like how, running a marathon is hard enough. Why would you go farther than 26.2? Don't most people stop at 26.2? But it was just really, the idea of the challenge, the personal challenge of pushing yourself and pushing myself to achieve things that I didn't think I was capable of. And so I really don't remember when I first heard about ultra running. My guess it was, I spent most of 2016 living in New Zealand, and I did a ton of reading about running at that point. And there's a famous ultra runner from the early 2000s named Scott Jurek. He has a couple books about ultra running, and I remember reading some of his books in New Zealand and just being totally amazed and really inspired. And so it was 2016, I was in New Zealand. And then 2017 is when I decided to start running ultras. I made a plan. I had never run a trail race before. And so 2017, I made a plan. I kind of mapped out some races, early season races, it was like a trail half marathon in March. And then it was a 25 miler in May, and then a 50 miler in July or August. And so that's kind of how I mapped out that first season, to kind of try to ease into it, but also challenge myself.
That's awesome. And you heard about ultra running, or started that journey sort of while in New Zealand, which is an amazing time, I think, to maybe be exploring that idea and trail running in general. How was trail running in New Zealand? Sidetrack. I need to hear about this. That's the dream.
Sadly, I did not run any trails when I was in New Zealand. I know it's like the most amazing spot. They've got all these epic trails, and I was just reading about it at that time.
Yeah.
I truthfully had lots of limiting mindsets. I imagine a lot of beginning runners have, and So I was still running on roads in New Zealand. Ran on a lot of roads, but hiked on some trails. But one day I would love to go back to New Zealand to really take advantage of what they call the Great Walks. So there's these epic multi-day hikes all around the country that people from all over the world go to New Zealand just for these long walks. And it'd be great to take advantage of that one day.
Yes. Someday you'll get back there and I'll go with you.
That sounds awesome.
Okay. You mentioned this 3-race series that got you in. What was it? A half, a 25 miler and a 50. Okay.
Right.
Where was this located? What was it called? And again, what was your thinking behind this race? Why'd you choose this one over whatever, all the other races out there?
Right. So there are a lot of factors that go into choosing races, and, different factors are important for different people. For me, it was timing. I wanted to have, I'm self-coached. I make my own training plans, and I've gone through, I did have a coach for a period of time, but particularly when I was just starting, I was making my own plans. I'm a DIYer. And so it was really about timing. I had this goal race, this 50-mile goal race, but I didn't want to go couch to 50-miler. Some people do that. Some people go couch to 100-miler. That's not the way I wanted to treat my running. And so it was, I knew it was like end of July, early August, where this 50-miler was. It was the Sheep Mountain 50 in Fairplay, Colorado. And so then I really just kind of backwards planned from there. So I thought, okay, I got a 50-miler in July. What would I like to do before that to get myself ready? Something shorter, like a 50K or a 25-miler. So there was a 25-miler less than an hour from my house in Cheyenne in Fort Collins, Colorado, called the Quad Rock 50. But there's also a 25-mile version. So I backed off, backed into that. So that race is in early May. So ran Quad Rock 25 in early May. And then I thought, well, I wonder if I can get a shorter race in before that. And so then in March, there was, I think it's called the Run Through Time in Salida, Colorado. And that was, they have different lengths. I think I know I did the 13-mile half marathon version. I think they also have a marathon version. And so that was in like first or second week of March. So that's really how I kind of planned out, that first season. And it really did work out pretty well. That Run Through Time half marathon in Salida was my first trail marathon ever. It might have been my first trail run ever.
Yeah.
And so it was a really good distance, not crazy amounts of climbing, but fun and challenging enough. And so I feel like for me, for my personality, I like to ease into things. I like to be prepared. I'm not a couch to 100-miler kind of person. And so I think easing into it that way worked really well for me.
That's awesome. Awesome. So this 50-miler, I'm curious, since this was the 50-miler would be your first technically ultra marathon, other than obviously you did these practice races, this half marathon, this 25-miler, what did your training look like leading up to this 50-miler? What, miles you're putting in, time, if that's how you measure? Would love to hear more about that.
I have never been a super high mileage trainer. So like when I was marathon training, road marathon training, a 40-mile week was a pretty good week. That was a healthy week. I've never been 100-mile-a-week kind of runner.
Yeah.
And so my biggest concern going into that first 50 miler was, can I simply make it to the finish line? If this is going to take me potentially 12 hours, maybe more, to finish this 50 miler, I've never been outside for that long. I've never been on a 12-hour hike before. So can I make it? Can I simply last? And, I did some research and listened to podcasts and read stuff and knew that I didn't have to run, for 12 hours in my training. I didn't have to do a 12-hour training run to get ready for this 50 miler. Even if I got halfway there, if I did a 6-hour training run, I knew that was going to get me, or so I was told, that was going to get me in pretty good shape. And it did. And so, so my training for that was trying to be as consistent as possible and trying to get on trails when I could. During peak training season, it was once a week for me. So I think I mentioned earlier that the nearest trail was an hour away from me. And so, it's not something that I'm able to do every day. And so it would be a Saturday or Sunday that I'd get up early and drive an hour to the trail and go for extended runs. And, these long runs would get progressively longer. They might start out at 2.5 hours and then 3 and then 3.5 and 4. And eventually, I imagine, this was several years ago, but I imagine my long run during that training cycle was probably in the 5 to 6 hour range to get ready for that 50 miler. And I feel like that's really what I was capable of at that point. And that was what I was able to do. And it worked out okay for me.
Yeah. The putting in the time can be difficult. I mean, not only is it hard on your body, but just making the time to train. I'd love to hear more about how you balance the rest of your life with this training volume you're trying to put into this 50 miler. And this could be advice from other races you've done as well, but how do you balance that time?
So everyone is going to be in a different spot. If you are young and single and, you have few responsibilities, you are one of the lucky ones. And so you can, go off for weekends in the mountains and just go run and camp and have fun with friends and all that kind of stuff. And when I started trail running, I was married, but had no kids. And so it really takes communication and a partnership if you have a spouse and if you have kids. And so when I started, and I was married with no kids, it was a little more straightforward. My wife could, if we'd go away for a weekend in the mountains, she would come with me. I'd go out and run and she'd do some other things. If I would go out by myself, I would just let her know, hey, I'm going to be gone on Saturday, or, I'd like to be gone on Saturday. And, communicating with your spouse, or your partner, about what's going on and, if you can get away for this time period. Then as kids come along, things get much more complicated. So it's really about, if you have family and job responsibilities, it's about communicating, with your partner and, making sure, if this is important to you, making sure you're holding up your responsibilities at home. Unfortunately, the trails are littered with people that have great running lives, but terrible home lives. And, as you alluded to, trail running really can take up a significant amount of time, especially if you want to do a lot and do well and be competitive. These are long races and, it takes a lot of training to do well. And so my personal relationships was, never something I was willing to sacrifice in order to have success on the trail. Trail running has always been an outlet. It's been a hobby. even a passion, but I'm not an elite runner. I'm not out there on the podium or winning races or anything like that. I'm out there for enjoyment, for exercise, for adventure. And so I think it really comes down to having your priorities lined up, making sure you know your why, you know why you're running trails. And, if you're going into an extended block, communicating with your partner about, your hopes and what your goals are and what that might look like for, if you're going to start some intense training in March or April and go through July or August, really talking with your partner about what that might look like and how that might affect your family life.
Appreciate your insight. Yes, as someone who is married and has one child as well, I can attest to how that does change things. I'm curious on the nutrition side too. Were you eating any differently, not on race day, but rather like preparing for your first ultra and these runs you're doing? Did you change your nutrition, what you were eating, or did that pretty much stay the same, like how you always ate?
For a long time, really since college, I've been a pretty healthy eater in terms of focusing on whole foods and, limiting junk foods and that kind of stuff. I certainly indulge like everyone else. But yeah, I think during your training block, food matters. There are some people that can somehow maintain awful diets and still be amazing runners. Someone like Courtney Dauwalter, famous, best female trail runner, one of the best trail runners, period, in the world. She does not have a great diet. She eats a lot of junk food, and she still is able to maintain her status as one of the best runners in the world. That's the exception and not the norm. And so I've gone through, different periods of just learning what works for me. In general, I like to run first thing in the morning when the weather's good. I like to run first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. That really works for me. If I push my runs to later in the day, I know I'm going to have some stomach discomfort. And I know that just from experience. And so I really think, beginning runners need to try things out and try different foods to bring with them on the trail. Try, different foods. What should I eat before a run? How far in advance should I eat before a run? So when I'm running now, I really try to plan out what time of day I'm going to run. And I really don't try to have anything heavy really within 2 hours of that run. I've got, little tricks that I'll do if I feel a little hunger before a run. I've got like these energy blocks, that are nutrient rich that, I'll pop a few of those before a run and a little bit of water. But, I think it's really important just to figure out your schedule. When are the majority of your training runs going to be taking place, and then try different things, what types of foods, when to consume these foods. And it's really just trial and error. It's going to be different for everyone. And, so it's, that's part of the fun of just, learning your body and learning what works for you.
Test. That is wisdom. Test. Okay. I want to dive into race day. What did race day look like for your 50 miler from when you woke up to how you felt after?
So
this should be a long story, maybe, or a good chunk.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it to the pertinent details. I actually, and this with this first race, I'm now remembering I forgot my watch. So,
Oh,
you know,
no.
most runners are like attached to their watch. And
Yeah.
interesting thing for my first ever marathon, a similar thing happened where I woke up the morning of my marathon and my watch was dead.
Oh,
And
man.
I was like, oh man, how am I going to run this marathon without my watch? And turns out it worked just fine. And I did better than I was planning on doing with no watch.
Oh, wow.
And so I wake up. This was in Fairplay, Colorado, small town, middle of nowhere, in the middle of mountains in Colorado. And I think it was the night before the race, and I realized I forgot my watch at home. I plugged it into charge, and I never grabbed it before I left. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I don't have my watch. So my wife was there with me. She had, she also has a multi-sport watch. And so I asked her if I could borrow hers, and she's like, of course. But of course I don't know how her watch works. I don't know, how to access the screens that I want to access. And so it's interesting. I hadn't really even thought of that from that race until just now. And so that was not one of the things that stuck with me, but there was some, before my first ultra that did cause some trepidation and a little anxiety, not having my watch. But stuff like that is going to happen. Silly things are going to happen when you show up for races. You're going to forget your shoes or your favorite shirt or your favorite hat or whatever. And, you're going to figure it out. If you've done the training, don't let that one thing stand in the way of a great performance. And so I was really enthusiastic for this race, and it started off well. And I, despite doing those earlier races to prepare for it, I didn't really know anything about pacing. I didn't really know how long this was going to take. I didn't know how much to push myself, how much to hold back. And so things were going really well. I remember being at like mile 30, and I was running 8-minute miles. And
Nice.
It's like, wow, this is great, feeling good. And remember asking at an aid station around mile 24, 26, what place am I in? And they're like, you're in 6th place. I'm like, all right, sweet, 6th place.
Whoa.
And so then, I continue hitting on the gas. I'm like, all right, this is great. I've got 25 miles to go. And mile 35, I completely hit a wall. It was like I got hit in the face with a 2x4. I just could not keep going. I had just left an aid station. I don't know if it was something I consumed at the aid station or if it was just my body telling me that, it was time to stop. But I literally had trouble putting one foot in front of the other. And so I ended up walking the last 15 miles of that race. So mile 0 through 35, I was great. I was in 5th or 6th place. And then after that point, I just was totally leveled. And I didn't know what happened. But it was, in hindsight and after talking to other people, it's pretty much a classic first ultra. Happens to a lot of people. Happens to a lot of marathon runners. At mile 18, you hit a wall. For me, in this first ultra, it happened at mile 35, where I just literally hit a wall and really had a hard time continuing to move forward. But I did finish. It was absolutely brutal. I cried at the end, but I did it, and it was a very proud moment for me when I finished that race.
Man, these walls are something that I consistently hear. I think from those who run ultras, and that's scary. That's scary sounding. Like you feel perfectly fine out of nowhere, just wham, with 15 miles left. How do you push through 15 miles?
When you're out there on the trail, you don't really have a choice. So you could just sit down and lay down on the side of the trail. But that's not that's not going to get you, home. It's not going to get you back to your hotel room or to the hamburger at the finish line or whatever. And so, kind of the difference between trail running and road running is if you're on a road race and you stop at an aid station, you're like, I'm done. There can be a volunteer or a course marshal that drives you to the finish line and no big deal. But on the trail, you're out there in the middle of nowhere. You don't have a choice. If you want to get back to the finish line or your hotel room, or your friends and family, you have to get yourself to the finish line. And so that's really what it was about. There was no choice. You have to keep going.
How'd you feel afterwards? That's probably a given, but I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, just emotionally drained. I remember approaching the finish line and having tears coming out of my eyes. And I don't really know what that was about, but I was so drained, just physically drained. And, man, walking 15 miles, I was like, what am I going to do? How in the world am I going to make it? But I did make it. And so, I think it was a mix of pride and just being physically and emotionally exhausted. One thing about hitting the wall, if we can go back to that for a second.
Yeah.
When you do enough races, you learn that there's often another side to the wall. So unfortunately in this race, I didn't get to experience it, but I've been in other races where you're halfway in or you're however long in and you feel like, oh my gosh, I can barely walk another step. I can't eat anything. I can't drink anything. How is this going to work? How am I going to do this? And you just keep pushing through and pushing through. And then a lot of times something happens. Either the sun comes out, you have the right kind of electrolyte drink, you have the right kind of snack, or someone comes up from behind you and gives you some encouragement, or you reach a downhill, or you see a really beautiful mountain view. Something happens. Or maybe it's indescribable and you don't know what happens, but you get your energy back. And so something that is really hard for beginning ultra runners to imagine is the other side of the wall. And it does come, and it's amazing when it happens, because now all of a sudden you're running and you've got this great energy and you're feeling good and you're like, wow, 20 minutes ago I could barely walk and now I'm running again. How did this happen? And it's a lot of times indescribable. But that is truly one of the joys of ultra running, is just the many peaks and valleys of a race, especially a long race. You go through so many different emotions and so many different physical states. And it's super rewarding to see yourself come out on the other side of hitting that wall and oftentimes end up having a great race when in the middle of it, you weren't sure if you were going to be able to finish.
Wow. That was amazing. What great advice and insight. Appreciate you talking about that and bringing that back up, pushing through the other side of the wall. So you finished this 50 miler, and I know that you've ran other races since then, but why don't you tell everyone else, what have you done since this 50 miler?
At this point, I've run probably between 10 and 15 ultras, and my longest has been 100K, and some 50Ks in there, some 50 milers, and some 100Ks. I'd say the most beautiful race that I've ever run is the Crested Butte 50 miler. It's in Crested Butte, Colorado. First or second week of October. There's fall colors. The mountains are gorgeous. It's a perfect time to run in the mountains. It's just a stunning race. And so if you ever have a chance to run the Crested Butte 50, I'd highly recommend it. It's a great course. It's just gorgeous. I've run the past several years. So I mentioned before the Quad Rock 25. The past several years, I've run the Quad Rock 50. So it's just a 2-loop course. It's 2 loops of the 25-mile course. And that it's close to home, and so it's convenient. I can drive down there in the morning, be home for dinner, and so it's convenient. I've run that. I think I've run that 3 times. There's another race close to me called the Never Summer 100K. That's kind of in the middle of nowhere. It's in Gould, Colorado, but it's not far from me. It's a gorgeous race in the mountains, in State Forest, State Park, Colorado. It's convenient. There's, you can kind of make a weekend of it. I camp, and it's a great race. I think I've run that the last 4 years in a row. I've run a 50-miler in Arkansas. I've run, a couple of years ago, I did back-to-back 50Ks in Colorado, in Buena Vista, Colorado. So Saturday, there's a 50K, and then you come back on Sunday and do another 50K on a different course. So that was a really fun challenge last year. So the majority of my races have been in Colorado, because it's close to home. With my young family, it's not easy for us to travel all around the country. If you're young and single, and you have the freedom, and you can go to California, and then New York, and then Florida, and Texas, and Washington, and you can do all these amazing races. That's great. That's not the stage of life that I'm in right now. So I like to do these ultras that are close to home, that are convenient, but have epic scenery. That's really what I'm after, is an adventure. Epic scenery, but also fairly convenient, close to home. Maybe we can get an Airbnb or a campsite close to the start line. And so, that's kind of the profile of the runs that I'm looking at.
Love it. Thanks for illustrating that for us. It's amazing how you start and you just can't stop sometimes. I've heard of others who ran their first and said that's definitely enough, but cool to hear that you've kept it going.
Yeah, I mean, you love it when you're in your race and you're planning your next race. Because honestly, when you're out there and you're running, 30 miles or 50 miles or 100 miles, you have a lot of time to think.
Yeah.
And so that's where I do my best thinking is when I'm running on the trail. And so, you're in a good spot when you're out there and you're planning your next race. Actually, last year when I ran Never Summer 100K, I had a rough time, and the whole time, not the whole time, but really the middle third of the race, I was planning how to quit. So, like I said earlier, when you're out there in the middle of nowhere, you don't have a lot of options if you want to quit. So most aid stations, you pull into an aid station, and if you say, I'm done, I can't go anymore, they'll find out if you're injured, or if you're just tired or dehydrated, or what the issue is. Assuming you don't have a broken leg or something, the people at that aid station are probably going to try to convince you to keep going. They're going to give you options. They're going to say, well, why don't you just have a seat here? Just take it easy. You've got plenty of time. They're going to offer you, watermelon and electrolyte drink and pretzels and soup and, all these different things. And they're just going to say, you know what? You don't have to decide right now. Just take it easy. And, if you finally decide that, no, I'm done, I'm not going to run anymore, they're going to say, at least in my experience, they're going to say, okay, well, this aid station is open for another 6 hours. So you're welcome to just hang out here, and you can sit in that chair for the next 6 hours. And when the aid station closes down, then we can drive you back to the start line. Wow. And so, that really makes you think like, oh man, do I really want to sit here for another 6 hours? That doesn't sound like very much fun. So usually that convinces people to just keep going. They're like, well, instead of sitting here for 6 hours, I may as well just at least get closer to the finish line. in 6 hours. And so, in this particular race, it was, the middle third, I was plotting how to quit, and I couldn't come up with a good way to quit. And, fortunately, the last third, I completely crushed it. I think I was low on salt. And so at this, aid station, it was like a 65-mile race at this aid station about the 42-mile mark. I had some electrolyte drink, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to keep going. And like 5 minutes later, I felt like the Incredible Hulk, like I could do anything. And so I ended up running the last 23 miles pretty much nonstop. And my best splits of that race were the last miles that I ran. So that was really a race, one of the best examples of a race for me, where I came out the other side of the wall. And it was just such an indescribable feeling. But it's, it's really, really amazing feeling, and it really can happen. You can be having a hard time, but it can get better.
Well, Jonathan, amazing stories. What advice or words of wisdom would you give someone who is looking to get into ultra running? Maybe they're just curious. Maybe they saw one of those 100-miler crazy videos on YouTube and they were like, why do people do this? But it's sort of intriguing. What would you say to these people who are considering the idea?
I personally believe that the most important part of running ultras is developing a love of running. There are a lot of inspiring videos on YouTube. I watch some of them, and you see people running Western States or Leadville or whatever it is, and this beautiful scenery at UTMB or whatever it is, and it's super inspiring. And those are the kind of people that say, like, I'm going couch to 100-miler. I'm going to run Leadville in July. And I caution against that approach. I personally believe it's much more valuable to go slow and steady, to work up to your capabilities, to build your strength, and most importantly, build your love of running. Because when things get tough, when life gets difficult, when you're overwhelmed with work and your kids, and it's hard to get out to run, or it's bad weather, you have to have another reason to keep going. Those well-produced YouTube videos will only get you so far. You've got to love it. And so I'd really encourage people to understand their why, and understand, why they're doing what they're doing, and learn to cultivate a love of running, a love of the trails, a love of trees and the outdoors and the mountains, or the prairie, or, wherever it is that you run. You've got to enjoy the process. It can't just be about the belt buckle or the end result.
Amazing advice. And you mentioned why you ran. I think you mentioned, you love the outdoors, you love the mountains. But in case that's not all of it, I'd love to know why you still run. Why do you love running now?
There are several reasons. So what's my why? Initially I'd say exercise, for maintaining my health and my heart, and that kind of stuff. Second, I'd say I do my best thinking when I'm running. I can't explain it, but whenever I have something going on in my business, in my personal life, I can almost always work out the solutions while I'm running, whether it's on roads or on trails. And so oftentimes it's at sunrise. I like to say my best thinking happens at sunrise at 10,000 feet. So I've got these routes that are just amazing. And I get to this point where it's like, how can I ever have a problem in the world? Like I can solve all of the world's problems when I'm running at sunrise at 10,000 feet. And so, yeah, so I do my best thinking while I'm running. And then I guess next, I love pushing myself and seeing what I'm capable of. I love, yeah, finally seeing that I can accomplish things that I didn't think I could accomplish before. And then last, I'd say I love the adventure. I love discovering new trails. I love beautiful mountains. I love the trees in the fall. I love running through aspen stands. I love drinking through running rivers. Yeah, I mean, it's a great experience. Yeah, so I hope that answers it.
Sure does. Jonathan, thank you for your stories today, explaining your why. I think this has been an incredibly valuable conversation. Thanks for coming on today. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, Brendan. Take care.
You too.
Hey, Brendan here. I just wanted to thank you for listening to today's episode. As someone new to ultra running myself, I found these conversations to be super valuable, and I hope they are for you as well. And if you want to know when the next podcast episode comes out, make sure you subscribe to the show. And one last thing before you head out, I'm thinking of putting together an online community for new and aspiring ultra runners, and I'm wondering what you think about the idea. You know, there's already several Reddit communities and Facebook groups out there where we can go ask any question we have related to ultra running, but I'd like to create something more tight-knit than that. I'm thinking a small-ish group where we can put our upcoming races on a race calendar, so we can support each other towards those goals and maybe find inspiration for our own upcoming races. We can post wins. We can find more easily other people that are in a similar stage as us. You know, I found it difficult personally to find other runners that are working towards similar goals, especially when it comes to ultra running, being that there's just less of us out there. So I think that could be really helpful. And I also think it could be fun to have these community members hop on at the end of a podcast episode and ask interviewees questions about their ultra running experiences. So if you think this idea is interesting or could be helpful to you, I'd love to know about it. Go ahead and go to bit.ly/OTU community. The link is in the description as well. And drop me your email in that online form. If I get enough people that are interested, I'd love to make this community a reality. Well, thanks again for your time and for listening to this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.